Hi everyone and welcome to the Culture Exchange podcast. My name is Frauke.
Hello everyone, my name is Marie-Christine. Together we are hosting this podcast for the international community where we talk about living and working abroad, expat life and welcoming special guests who share their expertise.
With our Culture Exchange podcast, we are providing a platform regarding the topics of culture, identity, and belonging to raise awareness and give insights on how to navigate the challenges and opportunities of a multicultural life.
Join us on our journey around the world.
We can be change and continuity. We can be dislodged and rooted. We can be global and local. That's the power of and.
Welcome back to another episode of the Culture Exchange podcast. These days, massive global shifts are reshaping identity and belonging, and the urgent questions, who am I, where do I belong, echo across social media and many podcasts. So all these questions speak to the human need for connection, for belonging in a world that more often asks us to fit in instead of inviting us to belong. A world that sometimes might feel lonely as well. Though these questions are not unique for third culture kids, TCKs do come to these questions early and often in life. So today we want to dive deeper into the topic of belonging, and we have a wonderful guest who shares her own personal story and her expertise with us.
Yes, thank you, Frauke. Indeed, I think this will be such a valuable conversation because so many of our listeners have actually experienced moving across cultures, whether as children, parents, or professionals. So it's not just about where we come from, but how we create a sense of home wherever we go. And our guest today has lived this firsthand. So we are very happy to welcome today our guest, Megan Norton, an American author, researcher, and global mobility expert. She's the author of Belonging Beyond Borders: How Adult Third Culture Kids Can Cultivate a Sense of Belonging. And having lived in 10 countries and 5 US states, Megan deeply understands the challenges of growing up across cultures. As an adult third culture kid herself, she now works with globally mobile families to help them navigate identity, belonging, and transitions. So Megan, welcome to the Culture Exchange podcast.
Thank you so much, Frauke and Marie-Christine. Thank you. This is such a privilege to be on your platform.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Megan. So yes, Megan, belonging is something we all seek. For people who've grown up across multiple cultures, it's an especially complex journey, right? So you work with globally mobile families and you wrote a book about belonging. What's the first thing you wish more people understood about third culture kids and their experience of belonging?
Yeah, well, belonging it's a universal human need. All of us need it to operate in a world that is increasingly complex, with relationships, with navigating politics, navigating different policies at different levels. And so I think increasingly we need to have a conversation more broadly about how do we all cultivate a sense of belonging in our homes, in our communities, and more broadly, countries. So for third culture kids specifically, who are moving between different cultures, moving between different countries, there are these frayed attachments to people, to places. Maybe there are these circumstances where they move to a new country and they're not being known Their story isn't known. And so they have to start over in cultivating a sense of belonging with friends, with teachers, with community members. And so that can be a challenge to navigate, who am I in this new space? And if we even think about the family unit, how do our family members cultivate a sense of belonging in a new community? What is our relationship to the country? So all of these are really big questions. And how do you break it down into bite-sized pieces, as you're moving, as you're adapting? And I think it requires a lot of self-awareness of who you are. What are your skill sets? What are your values? And how would you like to contribute to a new community? So it's a tremendous topic, but it's not unique to third culture kids. It's so that can give us some comfort that all human beings are navigating these complex questions.
Absolutely. And first of all, I have to compliment you on your book, Belonging Beyond Borders. It's such a beautifully written book filled with deep insights on belonging, thoughtful reflections, and gentle and compassionate guidance, along with practical activities for self-reflection. You just mentioned it. So, and in your book, you came up with a metaphor, which is a garden, helping your readers to explore, to plant, to cultivate their own place of belonging. And with this garden analogy, you created an imagery for your readers to explore patterns of belongings, opportunities for belonging. Do you mind explaining how to grow and flourish in a garden, especially through the lens of TCKs?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a gardener. And I do mention in the book that homesteader is not a role or identity I have ever embodied or considered myself, and even to this day. So, in fact, I had to do a lot of research about gardening, but that really stemmed from a place I was writing during the COVID season. And so there were the stay-at-home orders. And so I dabbled in gardening. And it really brought about this analogy of there's so many principles to gardening and cultivating and seeing something root down, take time to bloom, that I just saw in parallel with how my journey as a third culture kid of being uprooted, of being transplanted. Sorry, sometimes it's so cringy when I use these words from the gardening analogy, but it's so evident that in different seasons of our life, there are going to be different needs of who needs to speak into our lives, who comes along beside to help us grow. And I think the most dominant lesson I learned in gardening and comparing what the principles are to a sense of belonging is that we need to realize that growing things change. And so likewise, our sense of belonging can change. Having a sense of belonging, it's not a static or a settled thing. There's always some new dynamic, whether we're moving or someone's moving, or there are new leaders, or there are new parts of our story that's happening. And so we always have to renegotiate then, who are we in this season?
You wanted to ask more about the garden, Frauke, about
of course. Even though I have to confess, I don't have the green thumb either. So. But I just realized in your imagery of the garden, what I really found interesting, you also mentioned that you have to learn the limits of your garden, and nothing is permanent in gardens.
Yes, absolutely. And even when we are uprooting or transplanting, sometimes we have to cut off roots. We have to have new soil. And if we relate that to a sense of belonging, then What are the roots that aren't serving us anymore? What is holding us back, perhaps? And new soil, what are the nutrients? What do we need to surround ourselves with? It takes learning. It takes that research, that proactiveness to make sure that, yes, we are growing. But then the limits of the garden, we have to understand that perhaps we can't be best friends with everybody. We can't cultivate relationships with every single person in our network. And this is helpful to know with TCKs that when they're moving, yes, long-term distance relationships may look different. And it's not your responsibility to cultivate or garden that relationship from a distance. Have some grace for self and confidence and knowing that other people are cultivating their relationship with your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, we actually looked up the definition of belonging, right? So if you look that up, it actually says belonging is the feeling of being accepted, understood, and connected to people or places, regardless of geographic location. For adult third culture kids here, belonging is often tied to relationships rather than a single place. And here I want to actually talk about home, right? The concept of home, right? Because for our audience as well, so many expats and internationals, they say they feel at home everywhere or nowhere, right? So how does the concept of home evolve for adult third culture kids from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought up the definition of belonging, because so often, or too often, I think we think of belonging as a circumstance, and either we have it or we don't have it. But in fact, belonging is a thought and a feeling. And these feelings can be different things like connection, safety, love. Belonging creates the feeling we want to have. And so if we relate that to our concept of home, home doesn't need to be one place. Home can be actually something we carry in our hearts. Home can be ourselves. And I think that's an interesting shift in mindset and in heart set for TCKs when they think, I've left my home, I will never return to my home, or if home looks different when you return to it. And so knowing that, for example, you can be home full, that home is not only, like you say, place, but it can be people. It can also be your sense of purpose. So I think looking at it from a multi-definition way can be liberating, can be normalizing for TCKs when home is where is home? Where are you from? Can be sometimes very limiting in one lens, but then if we shift it into saying, no, there are many places that remind me of home and where I can feel at home because these are my definitions of home.
Yeah, home can in fact span the entire globe, right? For some TCKs. What I'm really curious to hear from you is like the second pillar of the quite complex concept of belonging. You just mentioned it, like belonging to people. Do you think that TCKs experience relationships differently based on your own experience and based on your experience from working with TCKs as a mentor as well?
I think there are a couple things that could be unique for TCKs. One could be that there are those distance relationships that so often it's our extended family or community members who are globally distant from us. And so that requires TCKs to get creative. And how do you maintain relationships at a distance, whether that's through digital social media or mailing letters, voicemails, or FaceTime. And then also, I think in a local sense, it requires TCKs to be observant, to be curious, to also know safety about who is safe to be able to befriend or to talk to. I think it takes that heightened, again, self-awareness and learning about in my local community, where do I find belonging? And so I think that's where it's also important to understand cultural contexts and cultural norms, because then TCKs can culturally code switch and knowing, okay, this is a way to act. This is a way appropriately to behave in this situation. And then when I'm home, maybe our family values something different. I mean, one very specific and obvious example that I knew growing up is taking off our shoes when we enter someone's house. And growing up, this is something our family did all the time. And it still surprises me here now in my US cultural context and environment that people do not take off their shoes when they enter my house. And it's a little disturbing because I'm like, it's just unsanitary, but it's just the cultural norm that where people don't do that, right? And so I think that's another way that TCKs can showcase, like they've really grown up in being eyes first, ears first, and walking into different environments, observing what is appropriate, maybe what is not. And they have this appreciation for different ways of being and moving in the world. And so when that comes to relationships, I think TCKs are uniquely equipped to be people-to-people diplomats, to be bridge builders, to bond communities. So all of these things I think are innately learned when you're crossing cultures and developing relationships with people of different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah. There are also certain misconceptions, what you mentioned, that people might actually think that adult third culture kids or TCKs, third culture kids, adapt easily, but they don't, right? Or that they feel home everywhere, but they don't as well. And then also the fact that people assume moving around is glamorous, but it's actually not, right? So is there another personal story that shaped your understanding, or any misconception in that sense?
Yes. I think you're speaking into the paradoxical experience, right? It's both and. There are the challenges and there are the celebrations of this lifestyle of growing up. And I love that you're bringing in that there's the hardship of relational loss. There's that grief. And by way of personal example, I think in my adulthood, I've realized how I could have cultivated a relationship better, perhaps with my grandparents, wishing I had asked them more questions, because I think there's a piece now that they've passed. I think there's a piece of family history that will always be unknown. And so there's that grief into adulthood of maybe how could I have learned more about their childhood or their likes and dislikes, things like this. So, and it's not that monoplace families would have more opportunity to ask their extended family this. I think it's something you choose as a family to say, this is important for us as a family unit to understand our family heritage, our legacy, our traditions. But there's some things like, why do we do this? Why? Where did this come from? And I wonder, is it because that's more of a family thing, or is it something that because my grandparents did is now why I was taught this? Where did those behaviors come from? So yeah, there's this both and to the story. There's the both and of wondering what has really shaped me, what has influenced me, and where did that come from?
Yeah, I picked actually two statements from your book I would love to discuss with you. The first is belonging involves responsibility. I like that really much. So we are responsible for our actions, thoughts, behaviors as well. And while we cannot control what others think about us, we can control our responses, both verbal and nonverbal. And the capacity for belonging is determined by our ability to be self-aware, to self-regulate, and to manage relationships and to collaborate. So in the end, it's on us. We have the responsibility. I really like that one. And secondly, belonging isn't found on social media. That really resonated with me. So social media can sustain connections. I think we all agree on that part, but it might be also a counterfeit community when used as a substitute. So platforms like Facebook and inaccurate gram, that's how you call it. So I think we all know what you're referring to. Distort reality by creating an unrealistic expectation in terms of belonging, in terms of beauty, friendships, and so forth. So overuse of social media can actually lead to detachment and not connection. So to the opposite of it.
Yes, yes. And I've had people ask me, is belonging achievable? Because there are these principles or examples kind of unpacked in the book. But I wanted to not be prescriptive or didactic about what belonging is and how to achieve it, because in and through all my considering of what is belonging, there's so much that I still don't know about how people cultivate it for themselves. I give this personal example of going to a music concert and not even knowing this genre existed and thinking, wow, all these people are big fans and know the lyrics. And I'm like, wow, there's so much about belonging I don't know. And that's not to be negative. That's actually to reframe, wow, what are the possibilities? And so when I talk about responsibility, it is in a gentle way to say, look at all of what is available for you to research or connect with. What are all the ways you can ask people what their interests are? Because again, in different seasons, we might have different interests and availability to invest in different hobbies or skills. And so I think when it comes to the social media parts, what are ways we can get off of our phones and into our community and see what are opportunities to connect with different clubs or social organizations. And that takes courage. That takes a lot of also emotional terrain to go through in your own life to say, am I willing to become a beginner again? Maybe be clumsy at something and not belong initially. But the reward of getting out there, of growing your comfort zone, I think is really special, but it does take discomfort and it's difficult work. And I'm preaching to myself because I've just moved to my 6th US state.
Oh, okay. I need to update this.
We correct that.
I'm here and there's so much comfort in my own, 4 walls in my house, and thinking, it's a scary world out there, but what are the smaller steps I can take, and where could I contribute?
Yeah, I think that's a good insight as well, to have the courage to be vulnerable, right? To start over again and just, leave your comfort zone and discover the world around you. Yeah.
Absolutely, Megan. Let's talk about a little bit about advice for parents raising third culture kids. For any parents raising currently third culture kids like today, what advice would you give them to help their children develop a strong sense of belonging?
I like to offer what I see TCKs need, and point out from my own story, perhaps what I could have benefited from with additional support. And what I'm finding in talking with TCKs, teenagers, and also young adults, is that they really valued family affirmations, family time, that being explicit that you are a part of this family. And that's, what does that mean? In our family, these are the values we hold. This is what we do. This is what we celebrate. And that goes beyond then the TCK profile. That goes as humans. How are we interacting with each other? And so sometimes I think when we use the term TCK over and over again, individuals might think, oh, that's all I am. I'm a TCK. And that can sometimes be limiting in thinking, okay, then when I go back to my passport country or when I become independent from my parents, I'm not a TCK anymore. And then who am I? So cultivating earlier, perhaps, who are you as your, as you are an individual with passions, with hobbies, with skills, and what does that mean for your meaning making in life and your purpose in life? So even when I've come along beside and mentored TCKs who are going into the workforce, sometimes I say, don't say you're a TCK because one, sometimes people don't know what that term means. And then you have to do this long preamble definition and that eats up time. But say, I did grow up overseas and that has made me adaptable, resilient, flexible, being able to troubleshoot, culturally aware, like all of these skills that you are naming about, yes, from your TCK experience. But if you keep internally giving yourself the message, I'm a TCK, I'm a TCK, sometimes that can create this faulty message of, all right, then I don't belong anywhere. I can't be anything. My identity is so hinged on this experience that it's hard for me to see anything else. And so making that differentiation that TCK is not an identity, it's actually an experience.
Oh, yeah, I like that. So you just mentioned all the unique skills of TCKs, and I totally agree. They have a unique place in the world as like global connectors, cultural bridges, adaptable thinkers, being resilient. So where do you think can they contribute most to make the world a better place?
I'm very biased in thinking that TCKs are the cheerleaders for for people-to-people diplomacy. I think because in childhood, in your adolescence, you've innately learned to code switch. You've learned empathy. You've learned to have a global mindset. This already equips you to be able to be positioned into a bridge builder, to be bonding communities. And what's more, I think TCKs understand the nuance of what that means. Sometimes there's this fear or this hesitation of how do I even start? How do I even make an effort to connect? And it doesn't have to be a grandiose way to make a scene or to publicly try to be a bridge builder, but it is asking those questions, giving room for nuance and complexity, that it does take a conversation to open the dialogue. And that's where I am so hopeful that TCKs are going to create that space for dialoguing, create the space for safety of difference, because they've navigated that, they've lived it. And so they have that capacity for discomfort, to be able to then walk alongside people who maybe don't feel confident in discomfort, to be able to grow and grow their circle of then understanding. So yeah, I really hope that people who have processed their story and reflect on their story can then advocate and encourage others to do the same. I think TCKs have the unique ability to reflect upon their story and then be able to use it to help others understand their story better. Jan Thompson says it's not the experience that brings transformation, it's our reflection upon that experience. So how can TCKs bring their culture-specific observations to more cultural general learning, and help others name those experiences for more cultural awareness?
If you have one sentence of encouragement for TCKs, if you address them directly, what would you say?
I would say give more grace to yourself. Yes, that this experience has its challenges, its celebrations, and I believe that TCKs sometimes are hard on themselves, that I should already be adapted, or I should know this because I lived in that country, or I should be this in this life stage compared to my peers. But I think if we extend so much more grace to ourselves and our stories, then we'll understand that there's so much beauty in it that we have, and that we offer just by being ourselves.
Oh, nice. I like that. I read that in your book that your personal goal is to have visited more countries than your age.
Yes.
Of course, now I'm curious. So how is it going?
Yes. So it's going well. I have exceeded that.
Okay.
Thankfully, yeah, I caught up, from COVID years when nobody was traveling. I got a little bit behind, but yes, and I'm.
What are the numbers? You need to share the numbers now.
Not your age.
Yeah, I'm at 41 countries now.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, and hopefully, I'm really hopeful to add 2 more this year.
Yeah. And Megan, are you revisiting actually the countries you used to live as a child?
Yes, I have. Not all of them, and that's what harkens back to what I said earlier, that when home changes, sometimes that can be really triggering, and rightly so. And I think it should, because you're seeing that your childhood memories are actually not there. Like they're not there in the form that you remember them, and but then you can discover that home is maybe a smell or a taste or something additional. So yeah, it's multifaceted.
Yeah, I could totally relate in terms of smells and taste.
Well, Megan, this has been such a valuable conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And for anyone who wants to dive deeper, definitely we can highly recommend your book, Belonging Beyond Borders. Megan, where can people find you and your work?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for recommending my book. My website is adultthirdculturekid.com, and I'm on Instagram at adultthirdculturekid. I'm on LinkedIn as Megan Norton, and it has various ways to connect on my website.
Yeah, and we will add those links to our show notes as well to anyone, to our listeners. They can check these out. And please don't forget to follow Culture Exchange for more conversations and insights on global living. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Dankeschön.